Welcome back to Scottish Sleep Stories, where ancient legends drift softly into the quiet of the night. Tonight's episode, we journey into the complete history of Old Valyria, from humble shepherds who discovered dragons in the depths of volcanoes, to the rise of a breathtaking empire of fire and magic, and finally to its apocalyptic destruction in a single day of unimaginable fury. But here's a question for you. Do you believe that even the greatest civilizations can fall in a single moment? Do you think true power can somehow outlast fate itself? Before we begin our descent into the smoking sea and the ashes of dragons, take a moment to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And as you listen tonight, I'd love for you to share your thoughts in the comments. What part of Valyria's story resonates with you the most? Now, settle in, let the firelight once upon a time, etched into the very heart of a smoldering volcano, lay a city of breathtaking ambition and terrifying beauty. This was not a city of humble dwellings, but a testament to audacious heights, topless towers that dared to kiss the clouds perpetually pregnant with volcanic ash and the awe of those who dared to gaze upon them. Here, the sky was not the serene blue of poets' dreams, but a canvas perpetually darkened by the living storm of hundreds upon hundreds of dragons, their leathery wings eclipsing the sun.
This way, lads.
Their shadows
to the
danced
green.
across pyramids that
Watch the
defied
stragglers.
gravity,
Hold the line.
palaces that mocked the
they're
natural
following
order,
true.
structures born not
From
of chisels
fire
and
eternal
hammers,
shadows
but
rise.
of magic and will. This
By
place
the
was
power of the
Valyria,
14
and
red
for
things
5
awakened
millennia she reigned
the ancient
supreme,
fury.
the most magnificent and terrifying civilization the world
Higher,
had
my
ever
dragon!
witnessed.
Let the flames
But
witness
her
our
reign
might!
was not destined to last.
Feel
In
the
a
heat
single
of the 14
apocalyptic day of
flames!
fire and
We are
unimaginable
unstoppable!
fury, Valyria was obliterated,
From the molten tears
erased
of
from
the
the
envy of
map
the
as if
ancient
she had
powers.
never been.
With this blood
Tonight we
offering, let the
embark on a
volcano's
journey to
fury
trace
course
the
through
complete
me.
history of this impossible empire, from its humble genesis among simple shepherds to its cataclysmic demise, and perhaps in its rise and fall we might discover the lessons it holds for us, echoing across the vast expanse of centuries, long before the thunder of dragon wings filled the skies, before the gleam of Valyrian steel graced the hands of lords and conquerors. There existed a people who knew nothing of power or the intoxicating allure of conquest. They were shepherds, simple folk, content with guiding their flocks across the rugged volcanic peninsula that jutted southward into the shimmering summer sea. The land they called home was a harsh mistress, unforgiving and demanding. Dominating the landscape was a ring of 14
The
active
Valyrian shepherds are
volcanoes,
no obstacle.
affectionately, if
Their
somewhat
forces are
nervously,
scattered.
named the 14
A swift
Flames
strike
by
will
the
shatter
locals.
them.
These were
Agreed.
not gentle,
Their lands will
slumbering
be ours
giants,
by
but
week's
rather
end.
perpetually active
Peace
fire
and
peaks,
forest
constantly
breeze
belching
blowing
forth
by.
plumes of acrid smoke
mine
and occasionally
five
spewing
street
rivers of
babble
molten
rage.
stone that painted the night
House
sky with fiery
Targaryen.
hues. The shepherds, hardy and resilient, had learned to coexist with the volatile nature of the world, finding that the volcanic soil, despite its dangers, was rich enough to sustain grazing lands for their flocks. They accepted the ever-present threat as simply a part of existence, an unavoidable reality in this fiery corner of the world. These early Valyrians, content with their pastoral lives, left little record of their origins. No grand chronicles were etched into stone. No meticulously preserved histories were passed down through generations. What we know of them comes from fragmented mentions in later texts, stories whispered and embellished through countless tellings until they took on the ethereal quality of myth, a tapestry woven from truth and legend. By all accounts, they were an unremarkable people, easily overlooked in an age when empires rose and fell like tides across the vast continent of Essos. The East, the ancient empire of Guise, a power forged in the fires of slavery and military might, had already conquered vast territories, building its formidable influence on the backs of its legions of slaves and the organizational genius of its ruthless ruling class. Giscari, with their eyes fixed on expansion and domination, would have looked upon these humble shepherds, if they bothered to look at all, with nothing but utter contempt. What threat could these goat herders possibly pose to an empire that had stood for centuries, its foundations cemented with blood and steel? But the shepherds possessed a secret, a hidden advantage that the Giscari, in their arrogance, could not even begin to imagine. Deep within the 14 flames, in the deepest volcanic chambers where the heat reached unimaginable intensity and toxic fumes could kill a man in seconds, something extraordinary lived. Perhaps they had always been there, these creatures of fire and scale, ancient beings whose origins were lost to the mists. Perhaps they were drawn to the volcanoes from some distant primordial place, heat, the darkness, and the isolated sanctity of the flames, the legends are frustratingly silent on the exact details of how the first shepherd discovered them. But discover them they did, dragons. Not as metaphor, not as artistic representation etched into tapestries,
My
but
blood
as
claimed
living,
the ancient
breathing
power.
reality. The sun, with scales harder than any armor yet forged by human hands, with fire in their bellies hot enough to melt stone into glowing glass. Imagine the sheer terror of that first encounter. Lone shepherd, perhaps seeking a lost animal or foolishly exploring where wisdom and instinct warned him not to tread. Descending into caverns lit by the eerie red glow
Hold
of
steady,
magma,
feel the bond.
the air shimmering with unbearable
Rise
heat,
with me!
thick with the stench of sulfur. There in a chamber
we are
carved by
transformed!
nature, or perhaps by the creatures themselves, dragons.
fire,
Not
light
one,
binds
but
this
many,
power.
ranging from newly hatched things no larger
skies
than
are ours.
dogs, their scales still soft and vulnerable, to ancient beasts whose very presence would have made the mountain itself seem small and insignificant. The rational response, the instinctual urge for self-preservation, would have been to flee, to run screaming back to the safety of the surface world, to bury the memory of what had been seen, to never speak of it again. But something extraordinary happened instead, whether through an act of inexplicable courage, driven by madness, or perhaps some inherent quality deeply ingrained within these particular people. The shepherds did not run. They stayed. They observed with wide-eyed wonder and growing understanding. Slowly, painstakingly, they began to comprehend the nature of these magnificent beasts. The taming of dragons was not a simple process. It could not have been merely a matter of whips and chains, though these brutal tools would later play a role in the intricate dance between man and dragon. Dragons are not horses to be broken or dogs to be trained through simple reward and punishment. They possess intelligence, a cunning that perhaps surpassed that of humans in certain ways, and they would not bend to mere force alone. The early Valyrians must have discovered this harsh truth through bitter experience, through countless failed attempts that surely cost lives, perhaps even entire settlements reduced to ash and bone by dragonfire. But they persisted, driven by a combination of ambition, desperation, and an undeniable fascination with these majestic creatures. And in that persistence, they made discoveries that would forever change the course of history. Magic entered the equation, a force as primal and untamed as the dragons themselves. The Valyrians learned, perhaps from contact with travelers from the distant and mysterious land of Ashai, where sorcery had ancient roots that stretched back to the dawn of time, or perhaps through their own dangerous experimentation, that dragons responded to blood and fire, not merely the physical fire of torches and hearths, but something deeper, something that resonated with the very essence of the fire that burned within the dragons themselves. They developed intricate rituals, spells whose specific nature has been lost to the relentless erosion of time, but whose effects were undeniable. Through these mysterious means, they forged bonds with the dragons, connections that transcended the simple relationship between master and beast, evolving into something far more profound, something almost spiritual. A dragon would choose its rider, accepting them in a way that seemed both intuitive and inexplicable. And once that bond was forged, it held for life, a pact written in blood and fire. The transformation this wrought upon the Valyrian people was not merely political or military, it was physical, a metamorphosis that altered their very being, whether through prolonged exposure to the dragons, through the magic they practiced, or through some complex combination of factors that even they might not have fully understood. The Valyrians began to change. Their eyes, once brown or black or green like those of any other people, shifted to shades of purple and violet, colors that seemed to echo the flickering flames they worked with, a reflection of the dragon fire that burned within their souls. Their hair lightened to silver and platinum white, giving them an ethereal, almost otherworldly appearance, setting them apart from any other culture in the known world. Were these changes gradual, slowly spreading across generations, a subtle evolution driven by proximity to the dragons? Or did they happen more rapidly to those who worked most closely with the great beasts and delved deepest into the forbidden arts of dragon magic? The ancient texts are silent on these crucial details, lost to the ravages of time and the fires of the Doom. But by the time the Valyrians emerged onto the wider stage of history, they were recognizable not just by their power, not just by the terrifying might of their dragons, but by their very appearance, a testament to the transformative power of their connection to these ancient creatures. With dragons at their command, the shepherds were shepherds no more. They began to build not mere villages or towns, but a city worthy of their newfound status, a monument to their ambition and their mastery of the forces of nature. The city of Valyria rose in the shadow of the 14 flames, and it was unlike anything the world had ever seen before. The Valyrians had discovered that their magic could be applied not just to living creatures, but to the very stone itself. They did not laboriously cut and chisel their buildings as other peoples did, but rather worked the stone as if it were clay, shaping it through fire and sorcery into forms that seemed impossible, defying the very laws of physics. Towers rose without any visible means of support, soaring to dizzying heights with an almost unsettling grace. Bridges spanned distances that should have required massive pillars, but instead floated effortlessly on nothing but air and magic, a testament to the Valyrians' mastery of arcane forces. The city was a breathtaking testament to the harmonious marriage of raw power and exquisite artistry, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. The establishment of Valyria as a magnificent, awe-inspiring city marked the true beginning of what would eventually become the Valyrian Freehold, a sprawling empire built on the backs of dragons and the mastery of forbidden magic. The shepherds had become dragonlords, and the world would never be the same. They organized themselves not as a kingdom with a single absolute ruler, but as a freehold, a unique confederation where all who owned land had a voice in the governance of their society. This was, on its surface, a surprisingly democratic arrangement for an ancient civilization, a system that seemingly valued the voices of all its freeborn citizens. But as with many such systems, the reality on the ground proved far less egalitarian than the lofty ideals enshrined in theory. Power, like water, gravitated naturally toward those who possessed the most significant advantage, those who commanded the skies with their fearsome dragons. And among those dragonlords, certain families inevitably rose to prominence, distinguishing themselves through their vast wealth, their unparalleled skill with magic, or simply the sheer size and unbridled ferocity of the dragons they commanded. Approximately 40 families came to dominate Valyrian society, forming the great houses of dragonlords whose words carried immense weight and whose dragons made that word law. These were not kings in the traditional sense, not crowned monarchs who inherited their power, but they might as well have been, for their influence was absolute and their authority unquestioned. Among them were families whose names history has tragically forgotten, lost in the cataclysmic destruction that would eventually claim them all, their legacies erased from the annals of time. Among them, too, were the Targaryens, who would improbably survive when all others fell, their dragons soaring above the ashes of the Doom. Though at this early stage they were far from the most powerful or influential of the Dragonlord families, they were respectable, yes, possessed of an ancient and proud lineage and their own formidable dragons, but in the intricate and often treacherous game of Valyrian politics, they were at best players of middling importance, their influence limited and their ambitions carefully restrained. The transformation from humble shepherds to formidable dragonlords had taken centuries, perhaps even longer. It was not a sudden revolution, a dramatic overnight shift in power, but rather a slow and deliberate evolution, each generation building carefully upon the discoveries of the last, each adding to the growing body of knowledge about dragons, magic, and the intoxicating allure of power. By the time Valyria emerged as a dominant force that would reshape the very landscape of Essos, the simple origins as humble herders must have seemed like a distant and almost unbelievable dream, barely remembered and possibly embellished beyond recognition. But those humble origins mattered. They established a pattern that would define Valyria throughout its turbulent existence. The relentless pursuit of power through the mastery of forces that others feared to touch, the audacity to reach for the impossible. The shepherds had dared to enter the fiery depths of the 14 flames and claim what they found there, bending the will of dragons to their own purposes. Their descendants would dare far more, reaching ever deeper into the forbidden realms of magic and ambition, until they ultimately reached too far, grasped at powers they could not control, and inevitably fell. The Valyrian Freehold, once it had coalesced from a collection of ambitious dragonlord families into a coherent and formidable political entity, represented something genuinely new and unprecedented in the world. It was not an empire in the traditional sense, ruled by a central emperor whose word was absolute and whose hereditary succession determined the fate of nations. Instead, it operated as a complex confederation of equals, at least in theory, where all who held land freely, the lords freeholders, possessed the right to participate in governance, to have their voices heard in the great decisions that would shape their civilization's future. This, in essence, was the meaning of freehold, a society where the freeborn landholders collectively controlled their own destiny, a system that theoretically promoted freedom and individual expression. But theory and practice, as they so often do, diverge sharply, creating a gap between the ideal and the harsh realities of power. While technically any landholder could participate in governance, the cold, hard truth was that those who commanded dragons held the true power, their influence dwarfing that of any mere landowner. The Dragonlords, those families who had mastered the ancient and perilous art of dragon riding and who maintained their own flights of the magnificent beasts, formed an effective ruling class, their decisions shaping the destiny of the freehold. They were the ones who mattered when important decisions needed to be made, when wars needed to be waged, when the overall direction of the freehold required setting. The other landholders could certainly speak, yes, but who would truly listen to a voice unaccompanied by the deafening roar of dragons? Among the Dragonlords themselves, a complex and often ruthless hierarchy existed, based on a myriad of factors, including the number and size of their dragons, the antiquity and purity of their lineage, and their mastery of the arcane sorcerous arts that were integral to Valyrian power. At times when circumstances demanded unified leadership, when the freehold faced existential threats or opportunities that required swift and coordinated action, the lords freeholders would elect archons to serve as temporary supreme leaders, granting them absolute authority for a limited duration. These were not permanent positions, not dynasties that could become entrenched and corrupt, but rather emergency measures deployed only when absolutely necessary. When the freehold faced imminent danger or required decisive action on the global stage, the archons would serve their purpose, guiding the civilization through turbulent times, and then gracefully step down, returning power to the collective of dragonlords, ensuring that no single individual could accumulate too much unchecked authority. Was a remarkably complex system that somehow managed to balance the competing ambitions of dozens of powerful and influential families while still allowing the freehold to act decisively and effectively when needed, a testament to the Valyrians' political ingenuity. The very heart of Valyrian power, beyond even the awe-inspiring might of the dragons themselves, lay in their unprecedented mastery of magic, an arcane art that they had elevated to a science. The Valyrians were not merely talented sorcerers. They had transformed magic into a systematic field of study, a rigorous discipline that permeated every aspect of their civilization, from the construction of their magnificent cities to the forging of their legendary steel. All Valyrian magic, according to the meticulous research of Archmaster Marwyn, who dedicated his life to studying these forbidden matters centuries after Valyria's fall, was fundamentally rooted in blood or fire. These were not mere poetic metaphors, but rather literal truths about the very essence and nature of their sorcery, the raw ingredients required to fuel their most potent spells. Blood magic, the darkest and most potent form of magical practice, required the sacrifice of living things to fuel its workings, the power of lifeblood channeling arcane energies. The greater the sacrifice, the more powerful the magic that could be achieved, a disturbing equation that led to unspeakable atrocities. Fire magic, on the other hand, drew upon the primal force of flame, particularly the unique and intensely powerful fires that burned within the dragons and in the volcanic depths of the 14 Flames, channeling the earth's raw energy. The blood mages of Valyria, known as blood mages or MGI, practiced arts that would have been condemned as unspeakable abominations in almost every other culture, their experiments pushing the very boundaries of what was considered natural and what was irrevocably perverse. The infamous flesh pits of Gogossos, a Valyrian colony located on the Isle of Tears in the far south, blood mages engaged in acts of such grotesque cruelty and depravity that even the limited historical records that survive speak of them with a palpable sense of horror and revulsion. They would forcibly mate slave women with various beasts, using their dark magic to ensure that pregnancy resulted from these unholy unions, twisting the laws of nature to their own twisted desires. The offspring of these unnatural couplings, twisted, half-human creatures called chimeras, served various purposes in Valyrian society, their existence a testament to the Valyrians' hubris and disregard for the sanctity of life. Some were kept as grotesque curiosities, displayed in private menageries as symbols of their creator's power and depravity. Others were used as slaves for particularly dangerous or demeaning tasks, their unnatural strength and resilience making them ideal for the most brutal forms of labor. Still others were subjected to further magical experimentation, their bodies serving as living canvases for the blood mage's macabre art. These horrific practices extended beyond the mere creation of chimeras. Some scholars, including the renowned Septon Barth, a figure of immense wisdom and unwavering moral conviction, speculated that the Valyrians had used their blood magic to create the dragons themselves, perhaps breeding them from wyverns and other lesser reptiles through sorcerous manipulation over countless generations, a dark and twisted act of creation. Whether this was true, whether dragons had always existed and the Valyrians had merely learned to tame them, remains a matter of intense debate among scholars and historians. What is certain, however, is that the complex relationship between Valyrians and their dragons involved magic at a fundamental level, a bond forged in the crucible of ancient rituals and arcane power. The bond between rider and dragon was not merely a matter of training, a simple act of domination, but something far deeper, forged through ancient rituals that likely involved blood sacrifice and possibly even death, a testament to the perilous nature of dragon riding. Perhaps the most visible and enduring legacy of Valyrian magical prowess was their legendary steel. Valyrian steel became the stuff of legends, its reputation growing with each passing century, and remained so centuries after the Freehold's cataclysmic destruction, and for good reason. Blades forged from this extraordinary material possess qualities that seem to defy the very laws of nature, their properties almost otherworldly. They were lighter than any castle-forged steel, yet demonstrably harder and stronger, able to withstand impacts that would shatter lesser metals. They could hold an edge that never dulled, remaining as sharp as the day they were forged, even after centuries of constant use, a testament to the skill and artistry of the Valyrian smiths. The metal itself was strikingly distinctive, featuring rippled patterns that flowed across the surface like water frozen in motion, darker than normal steel, often appearing almost black in certain lights, lending it an air of both mystery and menace. The creation of Valyrian steel involved a meticulous combination of both mundane and magical techniques, a delicate balance between craftsmanship and arcane power. The steel was folded thousands upon thousands of times, a painstaking process that removed impurities and created the distinctive patterns visible in the finished blades, enhancing both its strength and its aesthetic appeal. But folding alone could not account for the steel's seemingly supernatural properties, the qualities that made it so highly prized and so utterly unique. Spells were undoubtedly involved. Ancient incantations passed down through generations of mastersmiths, secrets guarded with a zeal that bordered on fanaticism. These rituals likely required blood sacrifice to power them, channeling the life force of the victim into the metal itself, imbuing it with magical properties. Dragonfire undoubtedly played a crucial role as well, providing the intense and concentrated heat necessary to work the metal in ways that normal forges simply could not achieve, allowing the smiths to manipulate the steel at a molecular level. Specific details of the process were closely guarded secrets, even within Valyria itself, known only to the select few mastersmiths who devoted their entire lives to the demanding and dangerous craft. When Valyria fell and the doom claimed the lives of everyone who possessed this knowledge, the secret of creating new Valyrian steel died with them, lost forever to the annals of time. Only one place in all the world retained even a partial understanding of the ancient art: the free city of Qohor. The smiths of Qohor possessed the ability to rework existing Valyrian steel, melting down old swords to create new ones or repairing damaged blades, preserving the legacy of the lost empire. But even they, with all their skill and expertise, could not create entirely new Valyrian steel from raw materials, their knowledge limited and incomplete. Meister Paul, driven by an insatiable desire to uncover the secrets of Qohoric smithcraft, spent years studying their methods, risking his life in the pursuit of forbidden knowledge. He was publicly whipped 3 times for asking too many intrusive questions, and was finally expelled from the city with his hand cruelly cut off as a warning to others, a testament to the Qohoric's fanatical protection of their secrets. According to his later writings, penned with a trembling hand, the Qohoric smiths used blood sacrifice in their desperate attempts to replicate true Valyrian steel, including the abhorrent sacrifice of infant slaves, a practice that shocked even the most hardened scholars. Whether this was the actual Valyrian method or merely the Cohoric's best, albeit ethically reprehensible approximation, remains a matter of speculation. The creation of Valyrian steel represented just one application of the Valyrians' vast magical knowledge, a single facet of their mastery of the arcane arts. They possessed glass candles, objects made from obsidian that burned with a strange, otherworldly light, serving as powerful tools for communication, divination, and various other magical purposes. With these enigmatic candles, a skilled sorcerer could see across vast distances, across mountains and oceans, could peer into the dreams of men hundreds of miles away, could even speak mind to mind with others who possess similar candles, transcending the limitations of physical distance. The glass candles went dark after the Doom, their flames extinguished when Valyria fell, a phenomenon that added to the growing evidence that somehow the city itself had been the source or focal point of the magic that permeated the Freehold, a nexus of arcane power that amplified the abilities of its inhabitants. The capital city of Valyria reflected this unparalleled magical mastery in every aspect of its construction, from its towering architecture to its intricate infrastructure. According to King Viserys Targaryen, who became obsessed with Valyrian history in his later years and spent countless hours meticulously building a scale model of the city based on surviving historical records, Old Valyria was built partially inside an active volcano, its very foundations intertwined with the Earth's molten core. The highest nobles, the most powerful dragonlords, lived in magnificent structures carved directly into or built against the volcanic face itself, protected by intricate magical wards that allowed them to live in comfort mere yards from flowing molten rock, a testament to their power and their mastery of the elements. At the very heart of the city stood a formidable building known as the Anogorian, a place shrouded in mystery and whispered rumors, where the blood mages practiced their dark arts, delving into the forbidden secrets of life and death. What exactly the top these they were sphinx these roads and these they were the government there were these fam it was the different the target they were in their land they were this the culture they valued freedom and self-expression for themselves while simultaneously keeping countless others in chains, subjugating entire populations to their will. They created breathtaking beauty in their architecture and art while simultaneously committing atrocities in their pursuit of power, pushing the boundaries of knowledge while steadfastly refusing to acknowledge or respect any moral boundaries. The Valyrians practiced customs that other cultures found deeply shocking or utterly disgusting, a testament to their isolation and their belief in their own superiority. They permitted polygamy, with dragonlords often taking multiple wives to increase their chances of producing dragon riders and strengthening their family's bloodline. Even more controversially, they practiced incest, frequently marrying brother to sister or other close relatives, a practice that was considered abhorrent by most other civilizations. This practice stemmed partly from their unwavering belief that their blood, the blood that allowed them to bond with dragons, needed to be kept as pure and undiluted as possible, uncontaminated by outside influences. To dilute their blood through marriage to lesser folk would be to risk losing the unique abilities that set them apart from the rest of the world, jeopardizing their connection to their dragons and their place at the pinnacle of power. The discovery and taming of dragons had undoubtedly transformed the Valyrians from obscure shepherds into a people with the unprecedented capacity to reshape the very world around them. But capacity, as the saying goes, is not destiny. The path from local power to continental empire required something more than just dragons. It demanded the unwavering will to use that power and the brutal wars to prove it, to assert their dominance and establish their place as the undisputed rulers of Essos. The first great test of Valyrian might came from the east, from an empire that had stood for thousands of years, a civilization steeped in tradition and military might that saw itself as the rightful ruler of all civilized lands. This was the old empire of Guise. And the clash between Guise and Valyria would ultimately determine the fate of Essos for millennia to come, shaping the geopolitical landscape of the continent. Old Guise was ancient when Valyria was young, a civilization with a history that stretched back to the dawn of time. Built upon the brutal foundations of slavery and unwavering military discipline, the Giscari had relentlessly conquered vast territories, establishing an empire that stretched across much of eastern Essos, Their influence felt from the shimmering shores of the Jade Sea to the rugged peaks of the Mountains of the Morn. Their capital, Old Guise, was protected by massive brick walls that legend attributed to Grozdan the Great, the semi-mythical founder of their civilization, a figure revered as both a warrior and a god. These walls, constructed with meticulous care and immense labor, had never fallen, had stood against countless sieges and assaults for centuries, their imposing presence serving as powerful symbols of Giscari permanence and unwavering power. The Giscari military prowess was legendary, with slave legions drilled to absolute obedience and tactical perfection. Their soldiers renowned for their unwavering discipline and their ability to execute complex maneuvers on the battlefield. The Giscari looked out across their vast domains and saw no equals, only subjects and those who would soon become subjects, their arrogance fueled by centuries of unbroken military success. When the Valyrians began expanding beyond their volcanic peninsula, establishing colonies and asserting control over vital trade routes, the Giscari viewed this with the same disdain that old established powers often reserve for upstart newcomers, dismissing them as insignificant irritants that would soon be crushed beneath their heel. Who were these upstart shepherds, these dragon-riding barbarians, to challenge the established order that Guise had painstakingly built over millennia? The Giscari, confident in their superior strength, sent their legions to put the Valyrians in their place, to remind them that the world already had masters and that they were most certainly not among them, their intentions clear and their resolve unwavering. Thus began the first of the Giscari Wars, a series of bloody and protracted conflicts that would be waged over centuries and would ultimately doom one of the two great powers, shattering the balance of power in Essos and paving the way for a new era of conflict and chaos. The Giscari had every reason to be confident, their chances of victory seemingly assured. They had superior numbers, a highly organized military structure, centuries of unbroken military tradition, and control of strategic positions throughout the region. What they did not have, what they could not conceive of as a decisive factor in the coming conflict, were dragons, the ultimate weapon that would turn the tide of war and reshape the destiny of Essos. The First War must have been a revelation and a nightmare for the Giscari, a brutal awakening to the new reality of warfare in a world where dragons ruled the skies. Giscari legions, composed of some of the finest infantry in the known world, marched in perfect formation against the Valyrian positions, their discipline and training unmatched by any other army. And then, with a deafening roar that shook the very earth, the dragons came, their fiery breath turning the battlefield into an inferno, not from the front lines, where legions clashed in brutal melee, nor from the flanks, where swift cavalry might exploit a weakness, but from the very heavens themselves did the Valyrian terror descend. Imagine, if you can, the sheer unadulterated horror of that first encounter from the Giscari perspective. The sky, once a familiar expanse of blue, suddenly choked with leathery wings, blotting out the sun and casting the battlefield into an unnatural twilight. The roar of the dragons, a sound unlike anything they had ever known, a primal scream of fire and fury, utterly drowned out the shouted commands of their officers, rendering their carefully drilled formations useless. And then came the fire. Dragon fire, an element unlike any natural flame, burned with an unholy intensity, hotter than the heart of a volcano, capable of turning stone into molten slag. Imagine the agony, the instantaneous incineration of men clad in plate armor, reduced to mere ash in the blink of an eye. The legendary discipline of the Giscari legions, forged in countless battles and the bedrock of their empire, fractured and crumbled. How could it not? They were being asked, nay, commanded, to stand firm while literally burning alive, while their comrades became screaming, writhing torches beside them, while the very air around them became too searing to breathe. The Valyrians secured their initial victory not through superior tactics, nor through any inherent courage that the Giscari lacked, but through the sheer overwhelming application of force from an angle the Giscari had no possible means to counter. Was an aerial assault centuries ahead of its time, a strategic masterstroke born of winged nightmares. But the Giscari were not a people to accept defeat with meekness. Their empire had been built upon the cornerstones of relentless persistence and cunning adaptation. They applied these same qualities to the daunting problem of dragons. The Second War saw the emergence of new and desperate strategies. Massed formations, shields interlocked, designed to offer some semblance of resistance against the fiery deluge from above. Colossal magical like each time in the third in the fourth the Valyr they would in the great but the coloss when they so and the survive in a the defeat over the generations that followed. These slaves and their descendants slowly forgot their own language, their own history, their own customs, forgetting everything except the faint haunting memory that they had once been something greater, that they had once ruled an empire and had fallen from grace. They learned to speak High Valyrian, the tongue of their conquerors, because knowing no other language was possible within the confines of their servitude. 3 cities survived from the old empire: Astapor, Meereen, and Yunkai, all strategically located on the shores of Slaver's Bay. These cities were allowed to continue existing not out of any Valyrian mercy, but because they served a specific and crucial purpose. They would serve as the primary slave markets for the region, providing the endless stream of human labor that the voracious Valyrian economy demanded. The Gishkari heritage in these cities survived only in fragments, in certain architectural styles reminiscent of their former glory, in a few fading traditions, and most ironically of all, in the very practice of slavery itself. But the great civilization that had ruled for millennia, that had once rivaled the might of Valyria itself, was gone, utterly destroyed so thoroughly that it would never rise again. The flames of Gi were extinguished forever. The Gishkari Wars established several patterns that would come to define the Valyrian Freehold throughout its long and tumultuous existence. First, they demonstrated beyond any doubt that the Valyrians were willing to use overwhelming force to achieve their objectives, showing no mercy whatsoever to enemies who refused to submit to their will. Second, they irrevocably proved that dragons were the ultimate military asset, capable of winning wars that conventional forces could not, serving as both shock troops and engines of absolute destruction. Third, and perhaps most ominously, they revealed that the Valyrians were willing to commit genocide to secure their position, to erase entire civilizations from the pages of history if they deemed it necessary. The destruction of Old Geese was not merely a military victory, it was a conscious, calculated decision to obliterate an entire culture, to rewrite history in their own image. Having conquered the east, the Valyrians turned their gaze westward, their ambitions stretching towards new horizons. For a time, they coexisted peacefully with the Rhoynar civilization that flourished along the banks of the Rhoyne, one of the mightiest rivers in the known world. The Rhoynar were an advanced and sophisticated culture in their own right, possessing powerful water magic and boasting cities of unparalleled beauty and ingenuity. The Valyrians established trading posts along the river, initially small settlements that posed no immediate threat to Rhoynar independence. Both civilizations benefited from this arrangement, with Valyrian goods flowing through Rhoynar markets and Rhoynar culture subtly influencing the Valyrian colonies. But what began as peaceful trade gradually evolved into something far more ambitious, far more dangerous. The Valyrian outposts grew into towns, then into bustling cities, their influence expanding along the Rhoyne like creeping vines. The Valyrians, particularly those of the burgeoning colony of Volantis, began to cast covetous eyes upon the fertile Rhoynar territories, their ambitions fueled by greed and the insatiable desire for expansion. As conflicts over trade rights and territorial boundaries escalated, small skirmishes gave way to larger battles, and larger battles inevitably exploded into full-scale war. Rhoynar Wars, as they came to be called, would last for generations, a brutal and protracted struggle that would ultimately culminate in the effective destruction of Rhoynar civilization and elicit the greatest military response Valyria had ever mounted. The Rhoynar princes initially fought separately, each fiercely defending his own city-state against the encroaching Valyrian threat. Princess Nymeria of Nisar argued passionately for a united response, warning her fellow rulers that divided they would inevitably fall to the Dragonlords one by one. But her counsel went unheeded, her warnings dismissed as the fear-mongering of a woman. The princes, blinded by pride and complacency, believed that their water magic and their formidable military prowess would be sufficient to handle the upstart Valyrian colonies. They won some early victories, proving that they were not easy prey, that the Rhoynar were a force to be reckoned with. But then the Valyrian Freehold itself took notice, turning its full attention to the rebellious Rhoynar. Prince Garin of Croyan emerged as the great Rhoynar hero, the charismatic leader who finally managed to unite the fractured city-states into a single, cohesive military force. He assembled an army of 250,000 men, an absolutely massive force by any contemporary standard, a testament to his leadership and the Rhoynar's determination to resist Valyrian domination. This formidable army marched to meet the Valyrians in battle, achieving victory after victory against seemingly insurmountable odds. At Celeris, they decisively defeated a Valyrian army, sending the survivors fleeing in disarray. At Volantis, they achieved their greatest and most celebrated triumph, routing an army of 100,000 men, and most impressively of all, killing 2 dragons in the process and grievously wounding a third. It seemed for a brief and shining moment that the Rhoynar might actually win, that Prince Garin had finally found the means to overcome the seemingly invincible Dragonlords. The hope of liberation flickered like a candle in the darkness. The Valyrian response was swift, brutal, and utterly overwhelming. They could not allow even the slightest possibility that they might be defeated, that their invincibility could be challenged. They could not permit other subject peoples to witness that the Dragonlords could be beaten, lest rebellion spread like wildfire throughout their vast empire. The Freehold mobilized not the paltry 3 dragons that had fought at Volontheris, but 300. Some accounts even claim that the number was higher, perhaps closer to 400 or even 500. The sky was so filled with dragons that the sun itself was obscured, plunging the land into an unnatural twilight. This was the full might of Valyria unleashed, and nothing, it seemed, could stand against it. The final battle was not a battle at all, but a slaughter. Prince Garin's valiant army, which had fought so bravely and won such stunning victories, was utterly annihilated, consumed by dragonfire. 300 dragons attacking in concert created an inferno of unimaginable proportions, turning the rivers themselves to steam, scalding the very earth. The heat was so intense that men died before the flames even touched them, their lungs seared by simply breathing the superheated air. Prince Garin himself was captured, broken, and forced to watch in helpless agony as his army burned and his people died, their screams echoing across the ravaged landscape. The Valyrians, in a final act of humiliation, caged him like a wild animal and displayed him in chains throughout the conquered territories, a grim warning to all who might dare to resist their power. According to Princess the Survivor, they sailed for years, wandering the seas, seeking a place where they might rebuild their lives far from the reach of Valyrian power. Eventually, the Rhoyne, the river, and from the drag, the central, but peak at its the emp, and it the free Volant. These cities were thoroughly Valyrian in culture and governance, though they developed their own local characteristics and customs over time. The ruling classes spoke High Valyrian and often included actual Dragonlord families or their lesser relatives, ensuring loyalty to the Freehold. The cities were connected to the capital and to each other through the famous dragon roads, those straight and perfectly constructed highways that allowed for the rapid movement of troops and trade, facilitating the flow of resources and maintaining Valyrian dominance. Qohor and Norvos, founded in regions farther from the capital, served different and more specialized purposes. Qohor, nestled deep within the forest, became renowned for its timber and later for its skilled smiths, who purportedly learned some closely guarded secrets of metalwork from Valyrian masters. Norvos, situated in the hills to the north, provided valuable metals and served as a buffer against the wild and untamed lands beyond the reach of Valyrian civilization. Each colony enriched the Freehold, sending tribute and resources back to the capital while benefiting from the protection and prestige that came with being part of the greatest civilization of the age. Even Braavos, that most independent-minded of the free cities, began as a Valyrian creation, though not an intentional one. Braavos was founded by escaped slaves who stole ships and fled into the foggy islands north of the Valyrian colonies, seeking freedom from their bondage. They hid their city for over a century before revealing its existence to the wider world, fearful of Valyrian retribution. The fact that they needed to remain hidden for so long speaks volumes about the thoroughness of Valyrian control. One did not simply escape the Freehold and establish a new life elsewhere. The dragons would find you, and the punishment would be swift and severe. The island of Dragonstone represented the westernmost extent of Valyrian expansion, a formidable fortress colony established on a massive rock in the Narrow Sea roughly 200 years before the Doom. Dragonstone was strange even by Valyrian standards, a place of brooding power and ancient secrets. carved from the black volcanic stone of the island into forms that resembled dragons in every chamber and tower. It served as a strategically important monitoring station, allowing the Freehold to keep a watchful eye on the lands of Westeros across the water, ensuring that no potential threats could arise unnoticed. But the Valyrians never attempted to fully conquer the seven kingdoms of Westeros, and scholars have debated the reasons for this strategic restraint ever since. Westeros certainly possessed valuable resources, including timber, iron, and fertile farmland, all things that an expanding empire could readily utilize, but it was also distant, relatively poor by Valyrian standards, and conquering it would have required a significant investment of resources for what was likely to be an uncertain return. The most plausible explanation is that the Dragonlords simply never viewed Westeros as being worth the effort. They had more pressing concerns closer to home, more valuable territories to exploit, and more worthy enemies to crush. Westeros was a backwater, and backwaters could wait. Daily life within the city of Valyria itself would have been unlike anything else in the known world. A sensory overload of sights, sounds, and smells that would both fascinate and terrify. The capital was home to perhaps hundreds of thousands of people, though exact population figures were never accurately recorded or simply did not survive the doom lost to the mists of time. The city was rigidly divided into distinct districts based on social status and function, reflecting the strict social hierarchy that permeated Valyrian society. Highest nobility, those Dragonlord families with the most power and prestige, resided in the grandest structures, built closest to the volcanic heart of the 14 Flames themselves. These were not the buildings did not merely house people, they made powerful statements about the might and sophistication of the Valyrian Freehold. The top bridges, Sphinx at the very it was the Eno, the city, the fort, the smith, a master, the fort, markets, silks, slave, spice, the mark, the slave, they served, but the no, they engaged. It was a life of unparalleled luxury and power, built upon the foundations of slavery and magic, beautiful and seductive to those who benefited from it, but utterly horrific for those who did not. The wealth flowing into Valyria was staggering, an unprecedented accumulation of riches that surpassed the wildest dreams of kings and emperors. Every colony paid tribute, sending a steady stream of resources back to the capital. Every conquered people sent a portion of their production, their labor enriching their conquerors. The mines beneath the 14 Flames operated constantly, their tireless slave labor producing gold and silver in quantities that would have made Valyria the richest civilization in the world. Even without their other advantages, this sheer wealth funded further expansion, allowing them to breed more dragons, develop more potent magic, and acquire more of everything that made them so powerful. It created a self-perpetuating cycle where power generated wealth, which in turn generated more power, seemingly without end, a golden age of unparalleled prosperity. But this golden age, this period when Valyria seemed invincible and eternal, contained within it the seeds of its own destruction, a fatal flaw hidden beneath its glittering veneer. The very practices that had made them powerful, their reckless use of blood magic, their constant mining that destabilized the volcanic systems beneath their city, and their absolute certainty that their power could overcome any conceivable threat, were all silently preparing the ground for a cataclysm of unimaginable proportions. Their hubris and arrogance, the Valyrians could not fathom that their civilization might ever end, that their dominion could ever be challenged. They were the masters of dragons, the greatest sorcerers the world had ever known, and the unchallenged rulers of half the known world. How could such a civilization possibly fall? To truly understand the Valyrian Freehold, one must confront the darkness that lurked at its core, the moral compromises that underpinned its power and prosperity. This was not a civilization of benign philosophers who stumbled upon power and used it wisely. It was a ruthless and pragmatic society that deliberately embraced practices that other cultures would consider abominations, pursuing knowledge and power regardless of the ethical or moral costs. Their magic, their very civilization, was built upon the foundations of blood and suffering, making many of their accomplishments morally compromised at best and utterly monstrous at worst. All Valyrian sorcery, as noted by Archmaester Marwyn centuries after the Doom, was rooted in blood or fire, a stark and unsettling truth about the origins of their power. This was not merely a metaphor, but a literal description of how their magic functioned. Blood magic, the most powerful and most dangerous form of sorcery known to the world, required the sacrifice of living beings to fuel its workings, to unlock its potent energies. The more significant the sacrifice, the greater the power that could be achieved, and the more devastating the effects. A small and relatively minor spell might require only the blood of an animal, a simple ritualistic offering. Greater workings, however, would demand human sacrifice, the ultimate demonstration of power and the most potent source of magical energy. The most powerful spells, those that could alter fundamental reality or create lasting changes to the world, required massive sacrifices, performed with exacting ritual precision to unleash their full potential. The blood mages of Valyria were the undisputed masters of this dark and forbidden art, their knowledge passed down through generations in secret grimoires and whispered incantations. They could glimpse into the future, though their visions were often imperfect and shrouded in ambiguity, their interpretations fraught with peril. They could curse enemies, sending misfortune, disease, or madness across vast distances, their vengeful magic capable of reaching the farthest corners of the Freehold. They could create magical objects imbued with power that would last far beyond their own lifetimes, imbuing artifacts with potent spells that would endure for centuries. And most terrifying of all, they could manipulate flesh itself, twisting living creatures into new and grotesque forms that served Valyrian purposes, blurring the lines between man and beast and defying the natural order. These blood mages were not merely talented individuals. They were a distinct and highly organized class of sorcerers who had systematized blood magic, transforming it from scattered practices into a disciplined field of study, a dark science with its own set of principles and protocols. They were the guardians of Valyrian's most potent secrets, the architects of its magical supremacy. The blood mages were not necessarily identical with the Dragonlords, though there was certainly significant overlap between the two groups. Some Dragonlords possessed significant magical ability and could perform blood magic themselves, wielding both dragonfire and arcane power. Others employed skilled blood mages to handle the more esoteric aspects of dragon riding and other magical tasks, relying on their expertise to enhance their own abilities. Not all blood mages were of the highest nobility. Some came from lesser families, their magical talent elevating them to positions of influence and authority that they could never have achieved through birth alone. This created an interesting dynamic within Valyrian society, where magical ability could partially offset the rigid social hierarchies that otherwise defined their civilization, allowing individuals from humble backgrounds to rise to positions of power and influence. The flesh pits of Gossos represent perhaps the most disturbing and morally reprehensible application of Valyrian blood magic, a testament to the depravity that festered beneath the surface of their seemingly glorious civilization. Gossos was a Valyrian colony located on the Isle of Tears, far to the south in the Summer Sea, a place of tropical beauty that masked unspeakable horrors. It became the site of experiments that pushed the boundaries of what civilized people could even contemplate. A realm where the laws of nature and the boundaries of morality were routinely violated. The blood mages in Gossos forced slave women to mate with beasts, using their magic to ensure that pregnancy resulted and that the offspring survived, defying the natural barriers between species. The creatures born from these unnatural unions, the chimeras, were twisted and grotesque abominations that combined human and animal features in ways that should not have been possible, mockeries of life and testaments to the depravity of Valyrian science. What purpose did these chimeras serve? The surviving texts do not provide complete answers, leaving many questions unanswered. However, we can make educated guesses based on the fragments that remain, more likely kept as mere curiosities, grotesque living tapestries showcasing the Valyrians' mastery over life and death, a testament to their magical and scientific, or rather pseudoscientific, prowess. Imagine them displayed in opulent menageries, conversation starters at decadent banquets, their existence a constant reminder of Valyria's unparalleled power. Others may have been bred for very specific utilitarian purposes, a combination of human intellect with the raw strength of a bear, perhaps, or the keen senses of a hawk. Imagine legions of beastmen bred for war, their loyalty absolute, their capabilities exceeding those of ordinary soldiers. Or perhaps they were created as laborers, possessing the intelligence to follow complex instructions but the tireless stamina of a work animal. Still others were probably destined for the cold stone tables of the blood mages, raw materials for their dark experiments. They were living puzzles to be dissected and reassembled, subjected to agonizing procedures in the endless pursuit of magical understanding. The blood mages sought to push the very boundaries of flesh, to discover the breaking point, the limit of what a living being could endure and still impossibly be. This practice in itself betrays a profound and disturbing lack of empathy, a casual disregard for the sanctity of life. Living creatures were viewed as nothing more than components, clay to be molded, tools to be used and discarded. Beyond the chimeras, the stitched-together abominations, there's compelling evidence suggesting the Valyrians engaged in even more ambitious projects, the creation and manipulation of entirely new life forms. Septon Barth, a scholar whose name is synonymous with Valyrian lore, dared to speculate in his controversial, oft-debated treatise, Dragons, Worms, and Wyverns, Their Unnatural History, that the blood mages might have even used wyvern stock as the raw genetic material, the base ingredient for the creation of dragons themselves. This is, of course, a deeply contentious suggestion. Many believe dragons existed naturally, primordial beings of immense power who predated the Valyrians by millennia. The Valyrians, these scholars argue, merely discovered them, learned to tame them, and weaponized their awe-inspiring power. But the unsettling possibility that dragons themselves are products of Valyrian blood magic, meticulously crafted biological weapons, simply cannot be dismissed out of hand. The creatures are almost too perfect for their intended purpose, too ideally suited to serve as instruments of war, symbols of dominance, and tools of intimidation. Did the Valyrians stumble upon dragons, or did they create them? The truth, like so much Valyrian lore, vanished in the cataclysm of the Doom, lost to the ages. The spells required to bind dragons to riders, to forge that unbreakable connection, almost certainly involved blood magic. Dark rituals performed in the heart of active volcanoes. The bond between dragon and rider was far more than mere training, more than the simple affection that might develop between a master and a pet. Though a shared history, beginning from a young age, undoubtedly played a crucial role, something far deeper transpired during the bonding process. A melding of minds, a merging of souls that irrevocably linked the dragon's consciousness to that of its rider in a way that persisted until death claimed one or both. This profound connection likely required ritual sacrifice, perhaps even human sacrifice, to ignite the magical spark and fuel the nascent bond. The dragon had to be offered something significant, something precious to ensure its eternal loyalty. The willingness of dragons to accept riders only from specific bloodlines, those of Valyrian descent, suggests that something inherently hereditary was at play, a particular quality in the blood, a specific sequence of genes that made the bonding process possible, that resonated with the dragon's very being. The creation of Valyrian steel, the legendary metal that held an edge sharper than any other, was not simply a matter of skilled smithcraft. It also involved intricate magical spells, enchantments that drew upon the potent energies of blood magic. The forging process was a dark art, shrouded in secrecy and fueled by sacrifice. Centuries after the Doom, the master smiths of Qohor, desperate to rediscover the lost secrets of Valyrian steel, were observed by Maester Paul to be sacrificing infant slaves in their frantic attempts to replicate the true forging process. Whether this was the actual Valyrian method, passed down through generations of smiths, or merely the Qohoric smith's best guess, their desperate attempt to reverse-engineer a lost art remains a mystery. But the fact that human sacrifice was their chosen approach strongly suggests they believed blood was an integral, essential component. The steel was folded and worked with dragon fire, imbued with its heat and power. Yes, the intense heat was essential, but the spells that imbued the steel with its supernatural properties, its legendary sharpness and unbreakable strength, required fuel. And blood magic provided that fuel, imbuing the metal with a dark and terrible power. The glass candles represented another application of Valyrian sorcery, one that was less overtly violent, less stained with the blood of innocence, but no less imbued with potent magic. These objects, crafted from obsidian and worked through methods lost to time, burned with an eerie, unearthly light that never consumed them. A trained sorcerer wielding a glass candle could perform feats that seemed utterly impossible, seeing across vast distances, peering over mountains and across oceans, invading and manipulating the dreams of others, communicating instantaneously with someone on the opposite side of the world who possessed another lit candle. These were tools of unimaginable power, granting the Valyrians unparalleled advantages in intelligence gathering and tactical coordination, capabilities that no other civilization could even dream of matching. After the Doom, all the glass that no other civilization could even dream of matching. After the Doom, all the glass candles went dark simultaneously, their flames extinguished as if snuffed out by an unseen hand. This sudden cessation of power strongly suggests that their functionality was intrinsically linked to Valyria itself, or perhaps to a concentrated source of magical energy that resided within the peninsula. When that power was irrevocably shattered, consumed by the fiery cataclysm, the candles ceased to function. It was only centuries later, as magic began to tentatively return to the world following the birth of Daenerys Targaryen's dragons, that the glass candles flickered back to life, their strange light once again illuminating the darkness. This connection between dragons and magical power seems fundamental to understanding Valyrian sorcery. The dragons were not merely weapons, instruments of destruction to be unleashed upon their enemies. They were also living conduits, potent sources, and precise focal points of magical energy, their very existence amplifying and enabling other workings of sorcery. The Valyrian approach to magic differed drastically from other magical traditions found across the known world. The warlocks of Qarth sought mystical enlightenment through the hallucinatory experiences induced within the House of the Undying, using potent drugs and deep meditation to achieve altered states of consciousness, to glimpse the hidden truths of the universe. The Red Priests of Arhal, based in Ashai, claimed to channel the power of their fiery god through fervent prayer and elaborate ritual, sacrificing to their Lord of Light. The Green Seers of the Children of the Forest connected to the vast Weirwood network, tapping into the ancient wisdom of the earth through communion with nature. But the Valyrians approached magic as a science, a system to be dissected, understood, and ultimately controlled. They sought to bend it to their will through meticulous ritual, blood sacrifice, and the systematic application of arcane principles. This rigorous, almost clinical approach to magic made them incredibly powerful, capable of feats that would have seemed miraculous to other cultures, but it also made them incredibly dangerous, both to themselves and to those around them. They relentlessly pushed boundaries that perhaps should have remained untouched. They delved into secrets that some traditions deemed forbidden, knowledge that was best left undisturbed. The Septons of the Faith of the Seven, writing centuries after the Doom, frequently claimed that the Valyrians were ultimately punished by the gods for their hubris, their arrogance, and their countless sins. Whether one accepts this theological explanation, viewing the Doom as divine retribution or not, there is undeniable merit to the idea that the Valyrians reached too far, that their reckless experimentation with forces they did not fully comprehend ultimately contributed to their own catastrophic downfall. The moral implications of Valyrian magical practices cannot be ignored when assessing their civilization. They achieved wonders, feats of engineering and sorcery that defied belief. Yes, they forged Valyrian steel, a metal unmatched in its strength and sharpness. They tamed dragons, the most fearsome creatures the world had ever known. They built a city of breathtaking beauty, a metropolis that defied the very laws of architecture, its topless towers reaching towards the heavens. But these incredible achievements were purchased with the blood and suffering of countless individuals, men, women, and children who had no voice, no choice in the matter. The slaves who perished in the mines, their bodies broken and their spirits crushed. The women forced to mate with monstrous beasts in the twisted breeding pits of Gogossos. The countless victims sacrificed to fuel the dark and terrible spells that sustained Valyria's power. All of these were victims of Valyrian ambition, the unseen cost of their glittering civilization. The civilization that produced such breathtaking beauty and such awe-inspiring power was also capable of casual cruelty on a scale that simply staggers the imagination. This darkness, this unwavering willingness to embrace horror in the relentless pursuit of power defined Valyria as much as its dragons or its legendary steel. It made them feared, not just for their military might, but for their fundamental otherness, their unsettling absence of the moral restraints that bound and limited other civilizations. When the Doom finally came, when Valyria burned and sank beneath the waves in a cataclysm of fire and ash, Many who had suffered under Valyrian rule must have seen it as an act of cosmic justice, gods or fate or simply the forces of cosmic balance, finally bringing the Dragonlords to account for their countless sins. Whether this interpretation is accurate, a true reflection of the universe's moral calculus, or merely a comforting narrative imposed after the fact, it speaks volumes about how Valyria was perceived by those who lived in its shadow. Powerful and magnificent, yes, but also fundamentally wrong. A civilization that had bartered its very soul for power and would eventually inevitably pay the ultimate price. Beneath the glittering grandeur of Valyria, beneath the topless towers that pierced the sky, beneath the awe-inspiring displays of magic, beneath the dragons soaring in triumph, lay a foundation built on suffering beyond measure. The mines located within the 14 Flames, were the engine that drove Valyria's vast wealth, the source of the gold, silver, and precious materials that funded their relentless expansion and enabled their ambitious magical workings. But these mines were also charnel houses, vast graveyards where slaves died by the thousands, toiling under conditions so brutal, so inhumane that death often came as a release, a welcome escape from torment rather than a tragedy. To truly understand Valyria, to grasp the full scope of its ambition and the true cost of its glory, one must descend into these depths, into the darkness and the fire, and confront the price that was paid for their magnificence. The 14 Flames were a ring of active volcanoes encircling the Valyrian peninsula, perpetually smoldering mountains that belched forth thick plumes of smoke and occasionally erupted with terrifying force. Within these mountains lay an extensive network of tunnels and chambers, some formed naturally by volcanic activity, many more painstakingly excavated by generations of slave labor over centuries. The Valyrians had discovered that these volcanic regions contained exceptionally rich deposits of precious metals, far more concentrated than could be found anywhere else in the world. Gold and silver, of course, but also other rarer materials, substances crucial to magical workings, lay buried deep within the earth, waiting to be extracted. Extracting these valuable materials required digging deeper and deeper into the mountains, following the twisting veins of ore through solid rock, working in claustrophobic chambers where the oppressive heat alone was almost unbearable. The Valyrians employed slaves for this backbreaking labor, initially captured prisoners from their brutal wars with old Geese, later supplemented by the victims of their other conquests and by countless individuals born into slavery, condemned to a life of unending toil. The sheer scale of this mining operation was staggering. Estimates gleaned from fragmentary and often contradictory sources suggest that hundreds of thousands of slaves labored in the mines at any given time over the centuries, possibly millions throughout the entire history of the Freehold. The conditions these unfortunate souls endured defy adequate description. The heat in the lower levels was so intense that it could kill an unacclimated person within hours, roasting them from the inside out. The air was thick with toxic fumes, volcanic gases that could burn the lungs or cause slow, agonizing poisoning. Slaves worked with the most rudimentary of tools, often just picks and hammers, breaking rock by hand and hauling it back to the surface through narrow, treacherous passages that snaked through the mountain's core. Accidents were commonplace, a constant threat looming over every moment of their miserable existence. Tunnels collapsed without warning, burying workers alive beneath tons of rock. Slaves stumbled and fell into underground lakes of molten magma, incinerated in an instant. Toxic fumes overcame weakened workers, who simply dropped dead in the passages, their bodies left to rot where they fell. Guards, themselves often slaves promoted to their brutal role, drove the workers onward with whips and worse, meting out punishments for the slightest infraction. The Valyrian overseers demanded constant production, a relentless flow of ore, and cared nothing for the lives or well-being of their workers. To them, they were simply a resource, a tool to be used and discarded. Beyond the ordinary dangers of mining in volcanic regions, the slaves faced another, more terrifying threat, something that was uniquely and horrifyingly Valyrian: fireworms. These creatures, distantly related to dragons but lacking wings or legs, were serpentine beasts that dwelled in the deepest, hottest chambers of the mountains, slithering through tunnels of molten rock. A fireworm could grow to an immensity, rivaling even the largest dragons in length, though lacking their majestic wingspan. They generated intense heat from their bodies, burning hot enough to melt through solid rock, leaving behind passages of hardened glass. They breathed fire, a searing blast of superheated plasma that was perhaps even hotter and more destructive than dragon flame. And they were fiercely aggressive, attacking anything and anyone that dared to intrude upon their territory. Slaves mining in the 14 Flames regularly encountered fireworms, and these encounters almost never ended well for the unfortunate slaves. A fireworm could burst through a tunnel wall without warning, incinerating everyone in the passage before they even had time to scream. Burnt and blackened corpses were routinely discovered in shafts where the rock showed signs of melting or where it was cracked and riddled with holes, clear evidence that a fireworm had passed nearby. The Valyrian overseers, in their callous indifference, apparently made no serious effort to hunt or eliminate the fireworms, perhaps because they considered the creatures too dangerous to confront directly, perhaps more likely because they simply didn't care enough about slave casualties to bother. The slaves were forced to work around the ever-present threat, learning to recognize the subtle signs of fireworm activity and praying that they would be lucky enough to avoid a deadly encounter. Slave revolts in the mines were surprisingly common, which speaks volumes about how desperate the conditions must have been. Revolting in a Valyrian mine was almost certainly suicidal, a desperate act of defiance in the face of certain death. Slaves had limited weapons, no dragons, no magic, and virtually nowhere to run, even if they somehow managed to overpower the guards. But people will inevitably reach a breaking point, a point where even hopeless rebellion seems preferable to continued suffering, and that point was reached repeatedly in the volcanic depths of the 14 Flames, fueling desperate uprisings that were inevitably crushed. The Valyrians possessed the resources to brutally suppress these revolts, sending in dragonlords when necessary to incinerate rebellious slaves by the hundreds, turning them into ash. The mining over their bone wars, the roin when there were women who the mine it was that it but the mining of the ancient if this any the over the centuries there must have been signs that this situation was unsustainable, subtle hints of impending doom. Increased seismic activity perhaps, or changes in the pattern of volcanic emissions, minor eruptions that served as warnings of greater instability to come. But the Valyrians, blinded by their arrogance and their unwavering certainty that their magic could control any conceivable threat, apparently dismissed these warnings, or simply failed to recognize them for what they were. They had controlled the 14 Flames for thousands of years. Why should they suddenly lose that control now? The slaves in the mines, those closest to the source of the danger, the canaries in the coal mine of Valyrian hubris, may have noticed subtle changes that their masters chose to ignore. They would have felt the tremors in the earth, smelled the ominous changes in the volcanic gases, noticed when passages that had been previously safe suddenly became dangerous, their walls glowing red-hot. But who would listen to the warnings of slaves? Their testimony was worthless, their fears dismissed out of hand. They were merely tools, expendable and easily replaced. If they claimed that the mountains were growing more volatile, well, the mountains had always been dangerous. It changed nothing. The mining operation beneath the 14 Flames represented the Valyrian approach to power in microcosm, a concentrated distillation of their values. They would relentlessly push any boundary, pay any price, risk any danger in the relentless pursuit of wealth and dominance. The suffering of others was irrelevant, a mere inconvenience to be dismissed. The warnings of nature were ignored, brushed aside in their unwavering belief in their own superiority. The reliance on magical solutions to every problem created dependencies and risks that went unacknowledged, a fragile web of power that could unravel at any moment. And beneath it all, both literally and metaphorically, lay a crumbling foundation, destabilized by the very actions that had made them powerful. When that foundation finally gave way, when the earth finally rebelled, the entire edifice of Valyrian civilization would come crashing down in a cataclysm of fire and ruin, a lesson etched in ashen blood for all time. In the year that would later be remembered as 114 years before Aegon's conquest, or 12 years before the Doom, something extraordinary occurred within the House Targaryen, a pivotal moment that would forever alter the course of their family's destiny. Daenerys, the young and perceptive daughter of Lord Enar Targaryen, began experiencing dreams unlike any she had known before. She saw the 14 Flames erupting in concert, a chorus of volcanic fury tearing the peninsula apart. She saw dragons dying, falling from the sky like burning meteors, Dennis, the target. Some could, and these give Lord the free. How could it? Perhaps indeed they made some, but whether he began the target selling it, he had to the destined dragons. And the migrant. This was though he the drag trans the target other house, but these the target. The question there is mentions there are whether the most if the did they or did we will the target as time the other scorned the pressure, but whether he chose perhaps his choice the target. They little did Dennis every Dragonlord family that had mocked the Targaryens, dismissing them as weak and fearful. Every house that had eagerly snapped up Targaryen properties at what they believed were bargain prices, gloating over their perceived advantage. Every sorcerer, merchant, slave, and citizen who remained within the opulent yet doomed capital of the Freehold, all perished in a single, cataclysmic day. The Targaryens, thanks to one girl's unsettling dreams and one man's willingness to be branded a coward rather than risk the annihilation of his family, became the sole surviving major Dragonlord house. In the cold, unforgiving calculus of history, the decision to flee transformed them into the last of their kind, the exclusive inheritors of a legacy that had once been shared by 40 great families, a tradition stretching back millennia. The day of the doom began like any other in the Valyrian Freehold. The sun, a fiery orb in the clear sky, rose over the 14 flames, the chain of active volcanoes that defined the landscape, casting long, dramatic shadows from the elegant topless towers of the capital city. Dragons, magnificent and terrifying, soared from their lairs, carrying their riders on errands of trade, diplomacy, or simply the pursuit of pleasure. In the bustling markets, merchants hawked their wares, from exotic spices and silks to potent potions and enchanted artifacts. Within the opulent palaces, Dragonlords engaged in intricate schemes of power and influence, their ambitions as boundless as the skies above. And deep within the mines beneath the mountains, slaves toiled and died, their suffering a constant unseen foundation upon which the Freehold's prosperity was built. Nothing, not a whisper in the wind, not a tremor in the earth, suggested that this day would be any different from the 5,000 years that had come before. No omen warned that by sunset, the greatest civilization the world had ever known would be utterly and irrevocably gone, erased from the face of the earth as if it had never existed. The exact sequence of events that unfolded on that fateful day will forever remain shrouded in mystery, as almost no one survived to record them. Those few who did escape the inferno were far from the epicenter of the catastrophe, their accounts fragmented and unreliable. What can be reconstructed is pieced together from these fragmentary accounts, from the geological evidence etched into the ruins centuries later, and from the desperate reports of survivors scattered across the distant reaches of the Freehold. The picture that emerges is one of unimaginable horror, a cataclysm of unprecedented scale and fury. The Doom of Valyria was not a singular event, but rather a cascading series of disasters, each compounding upon the others, each intensifying the devastation until the cumulative effect was the complete annihilation of everything within hundreds of miles of the capital. It began with the volcanoes. All 14 of the 14 flames erupted simultaneously, or near enough that the distinction became irrelevant for anyone caught in the path of destruction. This synchronicity strongly suggests that whatever triggered the doom affected the entire volcanic system as a whole, rather than being a spontaneous eruption of one volcano that then set off the others in a domino effect. Each volcano unleashed massive plumes of superheated ash and rock into the sky, columns that stretched miles into the atmosphere, blotting out the sun and turning day into an oppressive, choking night across the entire region. Anyone caught directly in the ashfall would have died within minutes, their lungs seared and filled with suffocating volcanic debris. But the volcanic columns were merely the prelude, the opening act to an even greater horror. What followed was far worse: pyroclastic flows. Cascades of superheated gas and rock fragments, denser than air, roared down the sides of the 14 flames at speeds exceeding hundreds of miles per hour. Nothing, neither man nor beast, could outrun these flows. They incinerated everything in their path, reducing magnificent stone buildings to smoldering rubble and turning living beings into ash in mere seconds. The temperature within these flows exceeded 1,000 degrees, hot enough to melt metal and cause wood to spontaneously combust long before the flow even reached it. The mountains themselves began to disintegrate, shattered by the immense forces unleashed from within. 5 centuries later, travelers brave enough to approach the haunted ruins would report that the very landscape had been fundamentally altered. Where once the Valyrian Peninsula had been a continuous, unbroken landmass, It was now fragmented into a multitude of smaller islands, separated by a stretch of water that would forever be known as the Smoking Sea, a testament to the inferno that had consumed the land. The sheer violence required to shatter an entire peninsula suggests that the volcanic eruptions were accompanied by earthquakes of unimaginable magnitude, possibly triggered by the same underlying cause, or perhaps set off by the eruptions themselves as the magma chambers beneath the mountains emptied in a catastrophic release. These earthquakes would have toppled even the magically reinforced structures of Valyria, the defenses that had been painstakingly built over centuries. The elegant topless towers, once symbols of Valyrian power and ingenuity, crumbled and fell, their peaks lost in the swirling ash clouds even as their foundations were ripped apart. Palaces built to last for millennia collapsed in minutes, reduced to piles of rubble and dust. The magical wards and enchantments that had protected the city from the volcanic heat, safeguards that had been relied upon for generations, failed or were simply overwhelmed by forces beyond their capacity to resist. Entire districts vanished into gaping cracks that opened in the earth, swallowed whole by the shifting ground. Others were buried beneath avalanches of volcanic material, while still others were inundated when the sea surged in to fill the newly created basins where solid ground had stood only moments before. Molten rock erupted from the 14 flames, flung thousands of feet into the air in a fiery spectacle of destruction. According to some accounts, this was not the relatively slow, viscous lava flow seen in gentler eruptions, but rather an explosive ejection of magma at velocities that defied description. The sky rained molten rock, dragonglass shards, and searing fire, an apocalyptic shower that consumed all in its path. Buildings not yet destroyed by earthquakes or pyroclastic flows were set ablaze by this relentless rain of fire. The heat was so intense that lakes boiled away in minutes, or worse, transformed into pools of corrosive acid through some volatile combination of volcanic chemistry and possibly lingering magical contamination. Anyone caught in the open was simply erased, burned so completely that not even bones remained as a testament to their existence. Even the dragons, those seemingly invincible creatures that had made Valyria the dominant power of the age, succumbed to the doom. The ancient texts declared that dragonfire could not kill a dragon, that their scales were impervious to ordinary flames, but the doom was no ordinary fire. It was something entirely unprecedented, a confluence of volcanic heat, toxic gases, and perhaps most terrifyingly, magical energies running wild as the spells that had controlled them for millennia abruptly failed. Dragons fell from the sky, overcome by the poisonous atmosphere or crushed by falling volcanic debris. Dragons within their lairs suffocated or were buried alive when the mountains collapsed, their roars of agony silenced by the crushing weight of the earth. The hundreds of dragons that had been Valyria's ultimate weapon and ultimate symbol were reduced to charred corpses and scattered bones, dead alongside their riders. Their reign of fire extinguished in an instant. The death toll defied estimation, a number so vast that it was beyond human comprehension. The city of Valyria alone likely held hundreds of thousands of people, possibly more. The surrounding regions, the fertile lands of the long summer, supported a population that was even greater. When the doom struck, virtually everyone in the immediate vicinity perished. Those slightly farther away, beyond the initial range of the pyroclastic flows and earthquakes, faced a slower but equally certain death from the relentless ashfall, the poisoning of water sources, and the collapse of all infrastructure that might have helped them survive. Refugees fleeing the disaster carried harrowing stories with them, tales of unimaginable horror. They spoke of desperately trying to outrun the catastrophe while the very ground split beneath their feet, swallowing loved ones whole. They recounted watching family members disappear into gaping cracks in the earth or being consumed by the fiery rain from the sky. Some escaped only because they happened to be on the edge of the destruction rather than at its center, their survival a matter of sheer random chance. The tsunamis generated by the doom struck coastlines hundreds of miles away, unleashing further destruction and claiming countless more lives. When massive amounts of land suddenly drop or are pulverized, the sea rushes in to fill the void, creating waves of unimaginable size moving at tremendous speed. East of Valyria, the Isle of Cedars acted as a partial buffer, shielding Slaver's Bay from the worst of the waves. However, the isle itself was devastated. The cities of Velos and Goi, once thriving centers of commerce and culture, were swept away completely, obliterated so thoroughly that they were never rebuilt. The isle has remained uninhabited ever since, a haunted place where no one dares to dwell, a silent testament to the power of the Doom. Other coastal regions reported waves that arrived without warning, towering walls of water that crashed over harbors and low-lying areas, drowning thousands in an instant. Ships at sea reported being tossed about by monstrous swells that seemed to come from nowhere, their hulls creaking under the immense pressure. Some vessels were simply never heard from again, presumably swamped by the chaotic seas that followed the Doom, lost forever beneath the waves. The tsunamis extended the disaster's reach far beyond the immediate area of the volcanic eruptions, killing people who had no idea what had happened hundreds of miles away, their lives extinguished by a force they could never comprehend. The magical consequences of the Doom may have been as profound as the physical destruction. When Valyria died, magic throughout the world seemed to diminish, as if a vital source of power had been severed. The glass candles, long used for divination and communication, went dark, their flames flickering and dying out. Spells that had worked reliably for centuries stopped functioning or worked erratically, their effects unpredictable and unreliable. At the Citadel in Westeros, Meisters who had always been skeptical of magic pointed to this phenomenon as proof that it had never been real, merely a collection of Valyrian tricks and illusions that had vanished when Valyria fell. However, those who understood magic better recognized the situation differently. Valyria had been a nexus, a focal point where magical power concentrated, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. With that nexus destroyed, magic became more diffuse, harder to access, weaker in its manifestations. It was as if a great dam had burst, scattering the waters across a vast landscape, diluting their power and making them more difficult to harness. The smoke and ash from the Doom affected the climate across the known world for months, possibly years afterward. The volcanic material ejected into the atmosphere reduced sunlight, causing what is sometimes called a volcanic winter. Crops failed, temperatures plummeted, and harvests were poor for several years running. This was not on the scale of the long night that had plunged Westeros into darkness thousands of years earlier, but it was significant enough to cause widespread famines and unrest in regions far removed from Valyria itself. The Doom's effects thus reached literally everywhere, directly or indirectly, touching every culture and kingdom, leaving an indelible mark on the world. The smoking sea created by the Doom and existing still in the present day remains a place of unparalleled horror and mystery, a scar on the face of the earth. The waters there are perpetually shrouded in mist and fog, heated from below by the lingering volcanic activity that continues centuries after the initial catastrophe. Ships that attempt to sail through the smoking sea often disappear without a trace or return with crews afflicted by strange and terrifying diseases, their minds and bodies warped by unseen forces. The ruins of Valyria can be glimpsed through the swirling mists, but they remain largely unexplored because approaching them is fraught with peril. The region is said to be haunted, cursed, and filled with horrors both natural and supernatural, a place where the veil between worlds is thin and dangerous. What caused the Doom remains one of history's greatest and most enduring mysteries, a question that has plagued scholars and mages for centuries. Several theories have been proposed, but none have been definitively proven. The most common explanation is that it was a natural catastrophe, a freak coincidence of volcanic timing where all 14 of the 14 flames happened to erupt at once. This seems unlikely given the sheer improbability of such perfect synchronization, but it remains a possibility, a reminder of the capricious nature of the forces that shape the world. Septons and some Meisters have theorized that the Valyrian spells that controlled the volcanoes failed, either through neglect, sabotage, or because the magical systems required for their maintenance had degraded over time. This seems more plausible, suggesting that the Valyrians' own hubris in attempting to control such massive geological forces may have contributed to their destruction, a cautionary tale of the dangers of unchecked ambition. Some religious figures, particularly Septons of the Faith of the Seven, claim that the Doom was divine punishment for Valyrian sins. They point to the widespread practice of incest, to the dark arts of blood magic, to the cruelties inflicted upon slaves, and to the general godlessness of Valyrian society as evidence that the gods had finally brought judgment upon them, a righteous reckoning for their transgressions. Whether one accepts supernatural explanations or not, the moralizing response tells us something about how the doom was received by others, a mixture of horror at the sheer scale of the destruction and a certain grim satisfaction that the mighty had been brought low, a reminder that even the most powerful empires are not immune to the forces of fate. A more disturbing theory, supported by fragmentary evidence and whispered in hushed tones, suggests that enemies of Valyria might have somehow caused the doom through magical sabotage, a deliberate act of destruction carried out by those who sought to bring the Freehold to its knees. The idea that someone could weaponize volcanic systems on such a scale seems far-fetched, bordering on the impossible. But in a world where magic exists, can it be entirely dismissed? If the Valyrians use spells to control the 14 flames, then it follows that those spells might be vulnerable to magical attack, a chink in their armor that a cunning enemy could exploit. Whether any enemy possessed both the knowledge and the power to exploit such a vulnerability remains unknown, a chilling question that haunts the pages of history. Perhaps the most unsettling possibility is that the doom was the result of Valyrian magical experimentation gone catastrophically wrong. If they were trying something new, pushing the boundaries of magic as they had always done, seeking to unlock even greater powers, they might have triggered a cascade effect that destroyed everything, a self-inflicted wound that proved fatal. This would be fitting in a grim and ironic way. The civilization that built itself through the reckless pursuit of power ultimately destroyed by that same recklessness, a victim of its own insatiable ambition. Whatever the cause, the result was clear and devastating. Single day, the greatest civilization the world had known was erased from existence. Valyria fell from the height of its power to utter annihilation with no warning and no chance to save itself. A sudden and irreversible collapse. The topless towers became ruins, their elegant forms shattered and broken. The dragons died, their roars silenced forever. The Dragonlord families were extinguished, their bloodlines brought to an abrupt end. 5,000 years of history, of magical knowledge, of artistic achievement, all of it was lost, consumed by fire and ash, leaving behind only whispers and shadows. The Doom of Valyria stands as perhaps the single most catastrophic day in the history of the known world, a cataclysm that changed everything that came after and left scars that remain visible centuries later, a constant reminder of the fragility of civilization and the destructive power of unchecked ambition. In the immediate aftermath of the Doom, as the ash settled and the survivors tried to comprehend the enormity of what had happened, a power vacuum of unprecedented scale opened across Essos, reshaping the political landscape in ways that would reverberate for generations. The Valyrian Freehold had ruled half the known world for thousands of years, imposing its will through military might and magical prowess. It had provided stability, however brutal, and a clear hierarchy of power, a system that, while oppressive, had maintained a semblance of order. Now that hierarchy was gone, shattered as completely as the Valyrian Peninsula itself, leaving chaos and uncertainty in its wake. The colonies, the subject peoples, the tributary states, all suddenly found themselves without masters and without the protection that those masters had provided, adrift in a sea of uncertainty. What followed was a century of constant warfare and upheaval that history would remember as the Century of Blood, a period of unprecedented violence and instability. The immediate crisis was simple. Who would control the vast territories that had once belonged to the Freehold? Who would step into the void left by Valyria's demise? The obvious candidates were the remaining Valyrian colonies, particularly the largest and most powerful ones. These cities were steeped in Valyrian culture and governance, spoke High Valyrian as their primary language, and maintained many of the traditions and practices of the Old Freehold. They possessed the infrastructure, the wealth, and the institutional knowledge to potentially hold together at least part of what had been lost, to salvage something from the wreckage. However, they also harbored conflicting ambitions and lacked any overarching authority to settle disputes between them, setting the stage for a bloody and protracted struggle for dominance. Valant located its they reached the tide Valant, however, each camp and the Coal, Bravo, the war, the battle, Valant, the turn, exhaust, the tide, Valant, while the cities. The question was what form that independence would take. Would they rebuild as free states, embracing liberty and equality? Would they revive the Gishkari traditions that had survived, albeit in a diminished form under Valyrian rule, reconnecting with their ancient heritage? Or would they continue as slave cities, perpetuating the system that had oppressed them but that had also become integral to their economies, their wealth and power built upon the backs of the enslaved? The answer, tragically, was the latter. The cities of Slavers' Bay clung to slavery as the very foundation of their societies, their economies utterly dependent on the exploitation of human beings. However, they also slowly began to reassert what remained of Gishkari culture, reviving old customs and traditions. They spoke Gishkari dialects again rather than pure High Valyrian, though their language had been so thoroughly influenced by Valyrian that it could never be the same as it had been before the conquest, a hybrid tongue that reflected their complex history. They rebuilt some of their traditional architecture, constructing the massive pyramids that had characterized Old Geese, towering monuments to their ancient civilization, but they remained fundamentally dependent on slavery, particularly the slave trade that connected the eastern and western portions of what had been the Freehold, a dark and brutal commerce that fueled their prosperity. Into the power vacuum came the Dothraki, nomadic horse lords from the vast plains to the east who had previously been kept in check by Valyrian military power, their expansion contained by the might of the dragon riders. With the Freehold destroyed and the successor states preoccupied with fighting each other, the Dothraki began raiding westward in massive khalasars, hordes of warriors sweeping across the land like a storm. They sacked cities, burned croplands, enslaved thousands, and generally made the eastern regions of Essos unsafe for settled civilization, their brutality unmatched and their thirst for conquest seemingly unquenchable. Multiple cities and even entire peoples were wiped out by Dothraki raids during the Century of Blood, their cultures and histories erased from the world. The Sarnori, a civilization of chariot riders whose cities lay east of the Free Cities, were particular victims of Dothraki expansion, their lands lying directly in the path of the Horse Lords' westward advance. City after city fell to the Dothraki, their populations scattered or killed, their once proud civilization reduced to ruins and ashes. By the end of the Century of Blood, the Sarnori civilization was effectively extinct, reduced to legends and archaeological sites. They had been a significant power during the Valyrian period, trading with the Freehold and maintaining their independence, but without the Valyrians to protect them or at least keep the Dothraki in check, they proved unable to defend themselves against the relentless onslaught of the Horse Lords. Piracy flourished during this period as well, taking advantage of the chaos and instability to prey on vulnerable merchant ships and coastal settlements. With no overarching naval power to police the seas, pirates established bases throughout the islands and coastlines of Essos, creating safe havens from which to launch their raids. Trade became a dangerous undertaking, with merchants requiring armed escorts for even short voyages, adding to the cost and complexity of commerce. Some pirates became powerful enough to threaten small cities or demand tribute from coastal settlements, effectively holding them hostage. Few even established themselves as semi-legitimate powers, forming pirate kingdoms that held territory and engaged in diplomacy alongside their raiding, carving out their own spheres of influence in the fractured landscape of Essos. The slave trade, far from diminishing after the Doom, actually increased, fueled by the constant warfare and the resulting displacement and enslavement of populations. The markets of Slavers' Bay were flooded with merchandise, human beings treated as commodities to be bought and sold. The mines of the 14 Flames were gone, but the demand for slave labor in other contexts remained strong. Agriculture, especially in the free cities that relied on plantation crops, required vast numbers of laborers to tend the fields. Households of wealthy merchants and nobles needed servants to maintain their lavish lifestyles. The galleys that conducted trade and warfare needed rowers to propel them through the seas. Every conflict produced captives who could be sold into slavery, and every sale funded further conflict, perpetuating a cycle of violence and exploitation. Amidst all this chaos, some positive developments occurred, glimmers of hope in the darkness. Braavos, the secret city that had been founded by escaped slaves and had hidden its existence for over a century, finally revealed itself openly, emerging from the shadows to take its place on the world stage. With the Freehold destroyed, Braavos no longer needed to fear discovery and punishment, its centuries of secrecy finally at an end. The city entered into diplomatic relations with other powers and quickly became a significant player in Essos politics, leveraging its wealth and naval power to protect its interests and promote its values. The Bravosi, with their relatively egalitarian society and their staunch ban on slavery, represented a different path than the other free cities, a beacon of freedom in a world dominated by oppression. Though their influence was limited by their relatively late emergence as an open power, they offered a compelling alternative to the established order, a vision of a more just and equitable society. The Century of Blood eventually ended, not through any single peace agreement or decisive victory, but through gradual exhaustion. The various powers, battered and weary from decades of constant warfare, realized that continued conflict was destroying their ability to function economically, and that the benefits of trade and stable borders outweighed the potential gains from continued conflict. Alliances became less fluid, borders more stable, and trade routes more secure, allowing commerce to flourish once again. The free cities settled into an uneasy equilibrium where each retained its independence but acknowledged certain spheres of influence, recognizing the limits of its own power. Slavers' Bay became the dominant slave trading region, with the three cities cooperating more often than they competed, working together to maintain their economic dominance. The Dothraki Khalasars continued raiding, but they were increasingly avoided or bought off rather than confronted directly, their power contained through diplomacy and appeasement. The most significant long-term consequence of the Century of Blood was the permanent fragmentation of what had been the Valyrian Freehold, the irreversible dissolution of the empire. There would be no new empire to replace it, no single power strong enough to unite Essos under its rule. Instead, Essos became a complex patchwork of independent cities, minor kingdoms, nomadic peoples, and dangerous wastelands, a diverse and fragmented land. The unity that Valyria had imposed, however brutal, was gone forever, replaced by a landscape of competing interests and shifting alliances. Trade became more complicated, requiring negotiations with multiple powers rather than operating under a single unified system. Culture began to diverge as the various regions developed their own unique identities rather than conforming to Valyrian standards, creating a rich tapestry of traditions and customs. Magic continued to fade during this period, its power diminished and its influence waning. Without the nexus of power that Valyria had represented, without the constant practice and systematic study that Valyrian blood mages had performed, magical knowledge dwindled, skills were lost, and spells stopped working or were forgotten. The secrets of the ancient arts were gradually lost to time, fading into myth and legend. By the end of the Century of Blood, magic was widely regarded as dead or dying, something that had existed in the past but was no longer a significant force in the world, a relic of a bygone era. The glass candles remained dark, their flames extinguished. The few dragons that had survived the doom elsewhere eventually died, and no one could hatch new ones, their fiery breath silenced forever. Magic became a matter of stories and histories rather than a practical concern relegated to the realm of myth and folklore. The Century of Blood demonstrated that while Valyria could be destroyed, the consequences of its existence could not be erased. The systems it had established, the dependencies it had created, the migrations it had caused, all of these persisted, shaping the political, economic, and cultural landscape of Essos for centuries to come. The slave economies of Slavers' Bay continued because no one knew how to run those societies without slavery, their wealth and power inextricably linked to the exploitation of human beings. The free cities maintained Valyrian cultural elements because that was their heritage, their identities shaped by centuries of interaction with the Freehold. The legacy of Valyria lived on, even in its absence, a constant reminder of its power and its fall. For better or worse, the scars of Valyrian conquest remained etched across Essos like ancient wounds. Ruined cities stood as silent testaments to a fallen empire, their crumbling walls whispering tales of dragonfire and subjugation. Landscapes were forever altered, reshaped by Valyrian ambition. Mines that delved too deep, roads that stretched across continents, and fortresses that dominated the horizon. And the populations themselves bore the mark of Valyria, carrying Valyrian blood in their veins, speaking the lilting cadences of the Valyrian tongue, a constant reminder of their shared, often brutal history. The chaos that followed the doom finally began to subside. Like the settling of dust after an earthquake, the world understood that a profound shift had occurred. An age had ended irrevocably. The era of Valyrian dominance with its dragon riders and sorceress might was relegated to the history books. The age that followed would be defined by political fragmentation, the rise of new powers vying for dominance in a world suddenly devoid of a single, all-powerful hegemon. It was a period marked by the gradual diminishment of magic, as the secrets of Valyria faded from memory, and by societies struggling to rebuild on the ruins of what had been lost, both physically and culturally. It was a smaller world in many ways, less connected as trade routes crumbled and fear of the unknown gripped the hearts of sailors and merchants, less ambitious as grand projects were abandoned in favor of mere survival, less certain of its power to reshape reality, as the limitations of human endeavor became painfully apparent in the face of nature's destructive force and the lingering mysteries of Valyrian magic. The giants had fallen, the dragonlords, the mages, the architects of a world-spanning empire, and what remained were merely humans, striving to survive in a world that had been forged for giants, a world that now seemed too large, too dangerous, and too unpredictable. 4 centuries after the Doom, the ruins of Valyria remained forbidden territory, a place of whispers and nightmares, avoided by all but the most desperate treasure seekers and foolhardy adventurers. The Smoking Sea, a vast expanse of churning water that now covers much of what was once the Valyrian Peninsula, is perpetually shrouded in ominous mists, heated from below by volcanic activity that continues unabated, a constant reminder of the cataclysm that reshaped the land. Ships that dare to navigate these treacherous waters often disappear without a trace, swallowed by the mists and the sea, their fates unknown. And those few that do return bring back horrifying tales of their journey, their crews afflicted with grayscale, a creeping petrification of the flesh. Madness born of the horrors they witnessed, or other stranger afflictions, ailments that defy diagnosis and leave healers baffled. The very air in the region is said to be toxic, poisoned by something more than simple volcanic gases, a residue of Valyrian magic perhaps, or the lingering echoes of the Doom itself. Some believe the area is cursed, that the ghosts of the millions who perished in the Doom still linger there, angry, malevolent, and seeking vengeance on any who dare disturb their eternal slumber. The few travelers who have glimpsed the ruins through the swirling mists speak of impossible sights, visions that challenge the very nature of reality, buildings that somehow still stand, defiant against 4 centuries of neglect, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions, preserved perhaps by the same sorcerous magic that created them. Dragons, or creatures that resemble dragons, soaring through the ash-choked sky above the ruins, their roars echoing across the desolate landscape. Things moving in the mist that do not appear to be human or animal, but something else entirely. Perhaps the chimeras, the monstrous creations of Valyrian blood magic that survived when their creators perished, or possibly something far worse, something spawned from the depths of the earth and twisted by the forces unleashed during the Doom. These reports are often treated with skepticism by rational people, dismissed as the ravings of madmen or the exaggerations of sailors eager to spin a good yarn. But enough, the most Jerian he sailed neither the but every Euron he displayed whether his but if he his more the fleet every Valyria perhaps in the year when she grand worms Barth the creature Valyria after the despite Valyria the Valyr all the most of it anyone the magic the Valyr they're under all of this but they the only how cool whatever the polit the tar Aegon the iron the free their high the architectural styles pioneered by Valyrian builders still influence construction in the free cities, grand structures that echo the majesty and ambition of their ancient predecessors. Practice of slavery, adopted from Guise but embraced by Valyria with a particular zeal, continues in Slaver's Bay and elsewhere, despite being the source of constant conflict and moral outrage, a dark stain on the legacy of Valyria. The return of magic to the world, marked by the hatching of Daenerys Targaryen's dragon eggs, suggests that somehow the connection between dragons and magical power that characterized Valyria remains relevant, a latent force waiting to be unleashed. When her dragons were born, the glass candles in the citadel, those enigmatic artifacts said to grant visions and amplify magical power, lit for the first time in centuries, a sign that the world was changing, that the old order was giving way to the new. Warlocks in Qarth suddenly found their powers increased, able to perform feats of magic that had been impossible before. Red priests began speaking with confidence about prophecies and visions that had been unclear or absent for generations, their faith rekindled by the birth of dragons. The world felt the presence of dragons again and responded as if waking from a long sleep, shaking off the dust of centuries and preparing for a new era. The lesson of Valyria, if there is one, seems to be about hubris and the price of ambition unchecked by wisdom, a cautionary tale for all who seek power. The Valyrians reached heights of power and accomplishment unmatched before or since, creating a civilization that seemed destined to endure forever. They tamed dragons, worked magic as science, built cities that defied natural law, and ruled half the known world. But they achieved this through methods that required constant expansion, a relentless drive to conquer and control, constant exploitation, the brutal enslavement of countless people, constant pushing of boundaries, both geological and moral, a reckless disregard for the consequences of their actions. They lived atop volcanoes while destabilizing them through mining, tempting fate with every swing of the pickaxe. They practiced magic that required blood sacrifice, a dark art that corrupted their souls. They built a society where magnificence coexisted with monstrous cruelty, where beauty and terror walked hand in hand. And ultimately, whether through divine judgment, natural catastrophe, magical failure, or their own recklessness, they were destroyed so completely that their very name became synonymous with hubris and fall, a warning etched in the annals of history. The Valyrian steel blades that survive in the present day serve as physical reminders of what was lost, tangible connections to a vanished age. These swords, passed down through noble families in Westeros and beyond, are treasured not just for their practical qualities, their unparalleled sharpness and strength, but for what they represent. A connection to an age when humanity seemed capable of achieving anything it desired, when magic and dragons walked the earth, when empires stretched across continents. The fact that no one can create new Valyrian steel emphasizes the irreversibility of the loss, the futility of trying to recapture the past. Some knowledge once lost cannot be recovered through effort or study, no matter how diligent or determined. Survivors of Valyrian blood who scattered throughout the world after the Doom carried with them fragments of what had been, echoes of a lost civilization. The Targaryens, obviously, but also lesser families, individuals who could trace their ancestry back to Dragonlords or Valyrian colonists keeping the bloodline alive in the far corners of the world. At least the Lyseni are descended partly from Valyrian settlers and still display some of the characteristic features: the silver-gold hair, the purple eyes, the fair complexion, reminders of their Valyrian heritage. Volantis, the old blood families who live within the Black Walls, maintain Valyrian ancestry and traditions, clinging to the customs and beliefs of their ancestors. These scattered remnants keep alive certain cultural practices, certain words and customs, certain memories of the civilization that birthed them, passing them down through generations. But ultimately, these are just echoes, faint reflections of a once vibrant culture, fragments of something that can never be fully restored, pieces of a puzzle that can never be fully assembled. The Valyrian Freehold was not merely a political entity, a collection of cities and territories, but an entire civilization, a way of understanding the world and humanity's place in it, a complex tapestry woven from magic, dragons, and ambition. When it fell, something genuinely irreplaceable was lost, a void that could never be filled. Subsequent civilizations have built on Valyrian foundations, used Valyrian technologies, spoken Valyrian languages, but none have been Valyria, none could be. The ruins stand as a warning as much as a loss, a constant reminder of the fragility of even the greatest empires. Every ambitious ruler who dreams of conquering the world, every sorcerer who seeks to push magical boundaries, every civilization that believes itself invincible and eternal should remember Valyria. Remember that the greatest power the world had known was destroyed in a single day, consumed by fire and ash. Remember that all the dragons and all the magic and all the might meant nothing when catastrophe struck, that even the most formidable forces are vulnerable to the whims of fate. Remember that hubris is not punished by gods or fate, but by the natural consequences of reaching too far without understanding what one is reaching for, of grasping for power without the wisdom to wield it responsibly. There is also inspiration in the Valyrian story despite its horrific ending, a testament to the boundless potential of human ambition. They dared to attempt the impossible and often succeeded, pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible. They showed that human ambition, for all its dangers, can achieve wonders, that the drive to create and to conquer can lead to extraordinary accomplishments. The Valyrian steel that survived them is still the finest metal ever forged, a symbol of their mastery of craft and their understanding of the elements. The dragons they tamed became legends that inspired dreams for centuries, creatures of myth and power that captivated the imagination. The magical knowledge they accumulated, even though most of it was lost, suggested possibilities that continue to fascinate scholars and sorcerers, hinting at the untapped potential of the human mind and the mysteries of the universe. And so we reach the end of our journey through the complete history of Old Valyria, a voyage through time and legend. From shepherds to conquerors to ruins beneath poisoned seas, we have witnessed the discovery of dragons in volcanic depths and the transformation of a people that discovery caused, a tale of ambition, magic, and destruction. We have walked through the magnificent capital with its topless towers and magical wonders built on foundations of blood and slavery, a city of unparalleled beauty and unspeakable cruelty. We have observed the wars that established Valyrian dominance, the brutal annihilation of civilizations that dared resist, a testament to their ruthless efficiency and their unwavering determination. We have explored the dark heart of Valyrian magic, the blood sacrifices and flesh-twisting experiments that pushed beyond all moral boundaries, a glimpse into the depths of human depravity. We have descended into the mines where countless slaves died to fuel Valyrian glory, their suffering a hidden cost of their empire's grandeur. We have stood with Daenerys the Dreamer as she warned her father of coming disaster, watched the Targaryens flee while others mocked them, and then witnessed the terrible validation of her visions as the doom consumed everything in a single day of fire beyond imagining, a cataclysm that shook the world to its core. We have survived through the century of blood that followed, observing the chaos that erupts when a dominant power suddenly vanishes, the scramble for power that ensues when the old order collapses. And we have examined the legacy that persists 4 centuries later, the echoes of Valyria that continue to resonate through the world, the ruins that remain forbidden, a place of fear and fascination, the knowledge that was lost, a treasure trove of secrets that may never be recovered, the influences that continue to shape the world despite Valyria's absence, a reminder that even in death, an empire can leave its mark. This history speaks to universal themes that transcend the specific details of dragons and magic, touching upon the fundamental truths of human nature. It reminds us that even the mightiest civilizations are temporary, that power corrupts when wielded without wisdom, that ambition must be tempered by understanding of limits. The Valyrians achieved wonders we can barely comprehend and committed atrocities we can barely stomach, their actions both inspiring and horrifying. They were human in their brilliance and human in their flaws, magnified to an extraordinary scale by the power they commanded, their story a reflection of our own potential for both greatness and destruction. The complete story of Valyria is not simple. It cannot be reduced to heroes or villains, to triumph or tragedy alone. It was both and neither, a complex and nuanced narrative that defies easy categorization, a civilization that defies easy moral judgment precisely because it achieves so much while causing so much suffering, a paradox that challenges our understanding of good and evil, because it pushed boundaries of knowledge and power in ways that were simultaneously admirable and horrifying, its legacy a source of both inspiration and warning. Understanding Valyria requires holding multiple truths in tension, embracing the contradictions and complexities of its history. They were magnificent and monstrous, visionary and blind, powerful and fragile, eternal and suddenly gone. Their story a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit and the devastating consequences of unchecked ambition. Thank you for joining me on this deep exploration of Valyria's complete history, a journey through the rise and fall of a civilization that continues to captivate and inspire. If you found value in this journey through one of the most fascinating civilizations in fantasy literature, then I would be deeply grateful if you would take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are countless other stories waiting to be told, other corners of this magnificent world to explore, other lessons to be drawn from the legends that have captivated millions. Together, we will continue to uncover these treasures, one tale at a time, keeping alive the wonder and wisdom that stories can provide. Till next time, may your path be lit by knowledge. May your curiosity never fade. And may you always remember that the greatest civilizations leave their marks not just in what they built, but in what they taught those who come after. The story of Valyria is never truly over as long as we remember it and learn from it, as long as we heed its warnings and draw inspiration from its achievements. Good night, and may you find wisdom in the ashes of glory, learning from the mistakes of the past and striving to build a better future. And so we reach the end of Valyria's long and haunting story, a civilization of unimaginable brilliance and unspeakable darkness. From shepherds who dared to tame dragons to rulers who shaped continents with fire and blood. Valyria reminds us that power, no matter how magnificent, is never eternal. Personally, what lingers with me most is not just the grandeur of their empire, but the fragility beneath it. The quiet truth that even the mightiest towers can fall when ambition outpaces wisdom. But what do you think? Was Valyria doomed by fate, by the gods, or by its own arrogance? And if such power existed in our world, do you believe humanity would use it wisely? If you found this journey meaningful, don't forget to subscribe to Scottish Sleep Stories for more deep dives into the legends and histories that shape our imagination. And please share your thoughts in the comments. I always love reading your reflections and interpretations. Till next time, may your dreams be calm, your thoughts wander gently, and may you always find wisdom even in the ashes of fallen empires. Good night.